On the surface, they couldn't be more different. A 13-year-old black paperboy from a struggling single-parent home, and a wealthy white businessman who seems to have everything except what matters most. But one fateful morning, when Jaden Williams spots Elliot Richardson about to step into oncoming traffic, his split-second decision to act sets in motion an extraordinary chain of events. But just when hope begins to bloom, a devastating twist threatens to destroy everything. We'll end up saving home. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories that touch the heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The pale morning light hadn't yet broken through the threadbare curtains when 13-year-old Jaden Williams carefully pulled himself out of bed. His worn alarm clock showed 5:15 a.m., right on schedule. The ancient floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he tiptoed past his mother's room, where he could hear her soft breathing through the partially open door. In the small kitchen, Jaden moved with practiced efficiency. He pulled out the slightly dented lunchbox from the cabinet and began assembling his mom's lunch for her double shift at the diner. 2 sandwiches with the last of the turkey, an apple he'd saved from his school lunch yesterday, and a small bag of baby carrots he'd gotten on sale. "You're up early again, baby," came his mother's tired voice from behind him. Jaden turned to see Trina Williams standing in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her eyes heavy with exhaustion from yesterday's late shift. Despite the fatigue etched on her face, she managed a warm smile that lit up her entire being. "Mom, you should be sleeping," Jaden protested, though he couldn't help but smile back. "Your shift doesn't start for hours. Can't a mother check on her son?" Trina walked over and kissed the top of his head, then frowned at the lunch he was preparing. "Jaden, that's supposed to be for your lunch today." "I already packed mine," he lied smoothly, gesturing to another paper bag on the counter. In reality, it was empty. He'd skipped lunch today, just like he had several times this week. "Besides, you need it more. You're working both jobs today." Trina's eyes misted over as she pulled her son into a tight hug. "Baby, you don't have to keep doing this. The paper route, making my lunch. You should be focusing on school, on being a kid." Jaden pulled back, his expression serious beyond his years. "Mom, we're a team, remember? Dad always said we have to take care of each other." At the mention of his father, Trina's breath caught slightly. 3 years had passed since the accident that took her husband, but the pain still felt fresh some days. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered, touching the small gold cross hanging from her neck, the last gift her husband had given her. "But he'd also want you to chase your dreams. How's that engineering project coming along?" Jaden's eyes lit up. "Mr. Peterson says my bridge design is one of the best he's seen. He thinks I could get a scholarship if I keep my grades up." His excitement dimmed slightly. "But even with a scholarship, college is expensive, Mom. Books, housing, meals. We'll figure it out," Trina assured him, though worry lines creased her forehead. "God always provides a way." Across town, in a vastly different morning routine, Elliot Richardson stood in his massive study, nursing a glass of expensive scotch he didn't really want. At 62, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suits gave him an air of distinguished wealth, but his eyes held a vacancy that no amount of money could fill. On his mahogany desk sat a silver frame, the last family photo taken before the accident 5 years ago. His wife Sarah's smile seemed to mock him now, along with the bright eyes of their daughter Emma. They had been heading to Emma's college graduation when the plane went down. He hadn't attended a graduation ceremony since. "Mr. Richardson?" Mrs. Chun, his housekeeper of 20 years, knocked softly on the door. "Your breakfast is ready." "Thank you, Margaret, but I'm not hungry," Elliot replied without turning around. Mrs. Chun stepped into the room anyway, her practical shoes silent on the expensive carpeting. "You haven't eaten dinner last night either, sir. Mrs. Richardson would want." "That will be all, Margaret," Elliot cut her off sharply, then immediately regretted his tone. Mrs. Chun had been there through everything, the success, the tragedy, the aftermath. She didn't deserve his bitterness. "I apologize," he said more softly. "Perhaps some toast later." Mrs. Chun nodded and withdrew, leaving Elliot alone with his ghosts and his guilt. Back in his neighborhood, Jaden pedaled his beaten-up bicycle through the pre-dawn streets, his newspaper bag heavy against his side. The route took him through streets that told the story of America's wealth divide better than any textbook could. He started in his own neighborhood, Modest homes with peeling paint, chain-link fences, and the occasional boarded-up window. Old Mr. Johnson was already on his porch, waiting for his paper. "Right on time, Jaden," he called out as Jaden made a perfect throw onto his welcome mat. "Have a great day, Mr. Johnson," Jaden called back, already pedaling toward his next stop. He knew most of his customers by name now, knew which ones wanted their paper on the porch and which preferred it by the garage. It wasn't just a job to him. It was his contribution to keeping his little corner of the world running smoothly. As he rode, the houses gradually grew larger, the lawns better maintained. In the distance, he could see the gleaming high-rises of downtown, where people like Elliot Richardson lived lives he could barely imagine. As if summoned by the thought, a sleek black Mercedes glided past him, its driver barely registering the young boy on the bicycle. Inside, Elliot absently checked his phone messages while his driver navigated the morning traffic. He rarely paid attention to the neighborhoods they passed through anymore. They all looked the same from behind tinted windows. Later that morning, Jaden sat in his advanced math class, his mind racing ahead of Mr. Peterson's lesson on geometric proofs. Numbers had always made sense to him in a way people sometimes didn't. They were reliable, consistent, and didn't care what clothes you wore or where you lived. "Nice shirt, welfare boy," whispered Trevor Matthews from behind him, flicking a paper ball at Jaden's head. "Is that your dad's hand-me-down?" "Oh wait, I forgot." Jaden's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward, focused on the equations on the board. His shirt was actually from the thrift store, $3 and only slightly faded. His mom had stayed up late washing and ironing it so he'd look nice for his presentation today. "Mr. Matthews," Mr. Peterson's voice cut through the classroom. "Since you're so eager to participate, perhaps you'd like to solve this proof on the board?" Trevor slumped in his seat, muttering under his breath. Jaden felt a small smile tugging at his lips as he watched his tormentor struggle with the problem. "Jaden," Mr. Peterson called out after a few painful minutes of Trevor's attempts, "would you like to help your classmate?" Jaden stood and walked to the board, aware of Trevor's glare burning into his back. With quick, confident strokes, he completed the proof, adding an elegant solution that made several students sit up straighter in appreciation. "Excellent work as always," Mr. Peterson beamed. "In fact, I'd like to speak with you after class about the upcoming engineering competition." Meanwhile, in his penthouse office, Elliot was facing a different kind of pressure. His personal assistant, James Cooper, stood before his desk with an increasingly frustrated expression. "Sir, the Children's Hospital Gala is one of the most important charitable events of the year," James insisted, waving an elegant invitation. "As the largest private donor, your absence would be noticed." Elliot continued typing on his laptop, his expression unchanged. "Then let it be noticed. I'll send the usual check." "Mr. Richardson," James tried again, "these connections are important for the foundation. Mrs. Richardson always said, 'Don't.'" Elliot's single word cut through the air like a knife. "Just don't, James." James sighed, tucking the invitation back into his portfolio. He'd been with Elliot long enough to recognize a lost cause. "What should I tell the board?" "Tell them I'm taking a walk," Elliot said, standing abruptly. "A long one." "A walk?" James blinked in surprise. "But sir, you have meetings." "Reschedule them." Elliot was already pulling on his coat. "I need some air that doesn't smell like overpriced perfume and false sympathy." At the Sun and Moon Diner, Trina balanced 3 plates along her arm while refilling coffee with her free hand. The lunch rush was in full swing, and her feet were already aching in her worn waitress shoes. "Order up for table 7, called Marco from the kitchen. "Got it," Trina called back, swiftly delivering her current orders before grabbing the new ones. As she passed the counter, her co-worker Jenny caught her arm. "Girl, you look dead on your feet," Jenny said, concern evident in her voice. "Didn't you work the late shift at the grocery store last night?" Trina managed a tired smile. "Bills don't pay themselves. Besides, I've got that interview at the call center tomorrow. Could mean better hours, maybe even benefits." "And Jaden? He's still doing that paper route. Trying to convince him to quit. But you know how stubborn he is." Trina's voice filled with pride despite her words. "Got another A on his math test yesterday. That boy's going places, Jenny. I just hope I can help him get there." Jenny squeezed her friend's hand. "Maybe it's time to let him be a kid for a while. My Marcus says he sees Jaden out there every morning, rain or shine." That's not right for a boy his age. You think I don't know that? Trina's voice cracked slightly. But what choice do we have? The insurance money's long gone, and even with 2 jobs, I'm barely keeping us afloat. Every time I look at those college brochures he brings home, order up. Marco's voice interrupted their conversation. We'll talk more later, Ginny promised as Trina hurried back to work, discreetly wiping her eyes. The afternoon sun was setting when Elliot finally parked his car in a quiet neighborhood far from his usual haunts. He'd driven himself, dismissing his driver's protests. The streets here were narrow, the houses modest but mostly well-maintained. Children's bikes lay in front yards, and the occasional wind chime tinkled in the breeze. He stepped out of his car, ignoring the curious glances from nearby residents. His tailored suit and expensive watch marked him as an outsider here, but for once, he didn't mind. There was something refreshingly honest about their stares, so different from the calculating looks he received at charity galas and board meetings. A group of children played basketball in a nearby driveway, their laughter carrying on the wind. One of them waved at him, and Elliot found himself waving back before he realized what he was doing. When was the last time someone had waved at him without wanting something in return? As he walked, Elliot noticed the small details of lives being lived without pretense. The prayer flags hanging from one porch, the carefully tended vegetable garden in another yard, the sound of someone practicing piano with the windows open. Emma used to play piano, he remembered suddenly. The thought didn't hurt quite as much as it usually did. In the growing darkness, he could see families gathering for dinner through lit windows. The sight stirred something in him, not exactly envy, but a recognition of what he'd lost. Or perhaps, what he'd never really had, even before the accident. "What am I doing here?" he muttered to himself, turning back toward his car. Tomorrow he would return to his normal routine, meetings, investments, philanthropy from a safe distance. But for now, for just a few more minutes, he let himself imagine a different life. One where wealth wasn't a wall between himself and the rest of humanity. Little did he know, fate had other plans for both him and a certain paper boy who would soon change his life forever. The next morning dawned with a peculiar stillness in the air. The kind of stillness that often precedes life-changing moments, though neither Jaden nor Elliot could have known that as they began their respective routines. Jaden's newspaper bag felt particularly heavy that morning, though he couldn't tell if it was the actual weight or his lingering exhaustion from staying up late to finish his science project. The streets were quiet, save for the rhythmic squeak of his bicycle chain that he kept meaning to oil when he could spare the money. Doctor, give me the news," Jaden hummed under his breath, an old song his father used to sing while making breakfast. The familiar tune helped keep his tempo as he expertly tossed newspapers onto porches and driveways. He'd gotten so good at it that he rarely missed his mark anymore, something that had taken months of practice and more than a few apologetic conversations with customers about wet newspapers. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold when Jaden turned onto Maple Street, one of the wider roads that connected his neighborhood to the more affluent areas of town. The morning traffic hadn't picked up yet, though he could hear the distant rumble of delivery trucks and early commuters. That's when he first noticed the man. There was something odd about the way he was walking, not quite stumbling, but disconnected somehow, like his body was moving on autopilot while his mind was somewhere else entirely. The man's expensive suit looked out of place in this neighborhood, and he was staring intently at his phone screen, completely oblivious to his surroundings. Jaden slowed his bike slightly, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. His mother always said he had good instincts, like his father, who'd been a volunteer firefighter. "Trust your gut," she'd tell him. "God gave us intuition for a reason." Right now, his intuition was screaming that something wasn't right. The man, Elliot, though Jaden didn't know his name yet, continued walking distractedly toward the intersection. His phone cast a pale blue glow on his face in the early morning light, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen as he typed out what seemed to be an urgent message. Inside his head, Elliot was composing a scathing response to his board of directors about their latest attempt to push him into a public appearance. "While I appreciate the board's concern about public relations," he typed, his jaw clenched in frustration, "I fail to see how my presence at another self-congratulatory dinner will." The screech of tires in the distance caught Jaden's attention. A red sports car came roaring down the cross street, moving way too fast for a residential area. The driver was gesturing animatedly, apparently arguing with someone on their hands-free device. Time seemed to slow down as Jaden's mind rapidly processed the scene unfolding before him. Elliot approaching the crosswalk, completely unaware. The traffic light turning yellow. The sports car showing no signs of slowing down. The empty streets meaning no one else was around to help. "Hey," Jaden shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Sir, stop." But Elliot didn't hear him over the sound of a passing garbage truck and his own preoccupation. He stepped off the curb just as the light turned red, his eyes still fixed on his phone screen. The sports car was barely 50 feet away now, its engine roaring as the driver accelerated to beat the light. Jaden could see the driver's face now, twisted in anger at whatever conversation they were having, completely missing the pedestrians stepping into their path. There was no time to think. Jaden let his bike crash to the ground, ignoring the clatter of newspapers scattering across the sidewalk. His legs pumped harder than they ever had before as he sprinted toward Elliot, his heart thundering in his chest. "Watch out," he screamed, but Elliot had finally looked up from his phone, directly at the approaching car. His eyes widened in horror as he froze, caught in the headlights like a deer, his body paralyzed by the sudden realization of his mortality. Jaden reached him just as the car's brakes finally squealed in protest. With all the strength his 13-year-old frame could muster, he grabbed Elliot's suit jacket and yanked him backward. The momentum sent them both tumbling onto the sidewalk as the sports car swept past them with inches to spare, leaving behind the acrid smell of burned rubber and the driver's belated horn blast. They landed hard, Elliot's phone skittering across the concrete and Jaden's elbow taking the brunt of their fall. For a moment, neither moved, both trying to process what had just happened as their hearts raced and their breath came in short gasps. "Are you okay?" Jaden asked, wincing as he pushed himself up. His elbow was scraped and bleeding, and he could feel new holes in his jeans where he'd skidded on the concrete. His mom wouldn't be happy about that, but at least they were alive. Elliot stared at him in disbelief, his usually impeccable suit dusty and disheveled. You saved my life," he managed to say, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't even see the car. I was just—" He looked around for his phone, then laughed shakily when he saw it lying face down several feet away. "I was too busy with something that doesn't matter at all, wasn't I?" Before Jaden could respond, people began emerging from nearby houses and shops, drawn by the sound of screeching tires and shouts. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner bakery came running out with a first aid kit, while Mr. Patel from the newsstand was already on the phone with the police. "I saw the whole thing," Mr. Patel was saying into his phone. "This young hero just saved a man's life. Yes, corner of Maple and 5th. Please hurry." "Jaden Williams, what were you thinking?" Mrs. Rodriguez scolded as she examined his elbow, though her voice was full of pride. "You could have been killed. Here, this might sting a little." She began cleaning his scrape with antiseptic wipes from her kit. "I'm fine, Mrs. Rodriguez," Jaden insisted, trying not to wince at the sting. "Really, it's nothing." More people were gathering now, creating a small crowd on the sidewalk. Someone had managed to get the sports car's license plate before it disappeared around the corner. Others were offering Elliot water, a chair, asking if he needed an ambulance. "I'm perfectly all right," Elliot said, brushing off their concerns with an embarrassed wave. "Thanks to this young man." He turned to Jaden, really looking at him for the first time. The boy's clothes were worn but clean, his face still round with youth, but his eyes holding a maturity beyond his years. "I don't even know your name." "It's Jaden, sir." But really, anyone would have done the same thing. He tried to stand up, but Mrs. Rodriguez firmly pushed him back down to finish bandaging his elbow. "No, they wouldn't have," Elliot said quietly, more to himself than to Jaden. Most people would have just watched it happen. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Please, let me reward you." "No," Jaden said firmly, finally breaking free from Mrs. Rodriguez's ministrations. "I mean, thank you, sir, but I don't want any money. I didn't do it for a reward." He glanced at his scattered newspapers and fallen bike. "I should really finish my route. The papers need to be delivered before people leave for work." "At least let me help you gather your newspapers," Elliot offered, already moving to pick up the scattered papers despite his expensive suit. "That's okay. I've got it." Jaden insisted, quickly gathering the papers himself. He checked his watch and grimaced. He was already running behind schedule. "I'm glad you're okay, sir. Please be careful crossing streets from now on." Before Elliot could protest further, Jaden had righted his bike, stuffed the newspapers back in his bag, and was pedaling away. The small crowd began to disperse as police sirens approached in the distance. Elliot stood on the sidewalk, watching the boy disappear around the corner. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Not just gratitude, though that was certainly part of it, but something more. A connection, perhaps. A reminder that in a world he'd written off as cruel and meaningless, there were still people willing to risk everything to help a stranger. He walked over to where his phone lay on the ground and picked it up. The screen was cracked, but he could still see the angry email he'd been composing. With a slight shake of his head, he deleted the draft. The board's pressures, the social obligations, the carefully maintained walls he'd built around himself. None of it seemed very important anymore. That boy, he said to himself, he didn't even think about it. He just acted. He remembered the holes in Jaden's jeans, the worn but clean clothes, the way he'd refused any reward. In all his years of wealth and influence, he'd rarely encountered such pure, unselfish courage. Meanwhile, Jaden was racing to complete his route, his hands shaking slightly on the handlebars as the adrenaline began to wear off. His elbow throbbed, and he could feel his heart still pounding in his chest. "It was nothing," he muttered to himself as he tossed another paper. "Anyone would have done it. Just like Mom always says, treat others how you want to be treated." But deep down, beneath his modest dismissals, a warm glow of pride began to spread through his chest. He'd saved someone's life today. His father would have been proud of that. He was sure. He could almost hear his dad's voice. "That's my boy, always looking out for others." As he finished his route, the sun now fully risen in the sky, Jaden allowed himself a small smile. He'd have to change clothes before school. His mom would worry if she saw the scrapes and tears, but he felt different somehow. Stronger, more capable. The morning's events played over and over in his mind as he pedaled home. The man's face when he realized the danger, the sound of the car's engine, the rough scratch of expensive wool suit fabric in his hands as he pulled the stranger to safety. It all seemed slightly surreal now, like something from a movie rather than his ordinary life. His hands were still trembling slightly as he locked up his bike in front of his apartment building. Looking down at them, he flexed his fingers, remembering how his father's hands would sometimes shake after a particularly difficult rescue. "It's okay to be scared," his dad had told him once. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what needs to be done anyway." Jaden took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had a math test first period, and he couldn't let this morning's excitement distract him from that. His mom was counting on him to keep his grades up, and one act of heroism didn't change their responsibility. Still, as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, he couldn't help but wonder about the man he'd saved. Who was he? Where had he been going? Would their paths ever cross again? Little did Jaden know, Elliot Richardson was wondering the same things about him. As Elliot sat in the back of the town car that his assistant had dispatched to pick him up, he found himself unable to focus on his usual morning briefing. "Sir?" James looked up from his tablet with concern. "Are you sure you don't want to see a doctor?" The police report mentioned. "I'm fine, James," Elliot interrupted, still staring out the window at the passing streets. "But I need you to find out everything you can about a boy named Jaden. He delivers newspapers in this area. Maybe 13 or 14 years old. African American. Lives somewhere nearby, I assume." James raised an eyebrow, but made a note on his tablet. "May I ask why?" Elliot touched the small tear in his suit jacket where Jaden had grabbed him, pulling him back from death's door. "Because," he said quietly, "I owe him my life, and I need to find a way to repay that debt, whether he wants me to or not." As the car pulled away from the neighborhood, neither Elliot nor Jaden could have guessed how their brief encounter would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the biggest moments come disguised as ordinary mornings, and the bravest acts look simple in the doing, but ripple outward in ways we can never predict. The sun climbed higher in the sky, traffic began to fill the streets, and the city went about its business as usual. But for two people, a wealthy man who had lost his way and a young boy who had found his courage, the world would never look quite the same again. The aroma of cinnamon oatmeal filled the small kitchen as Trina stirred the pot, occasionally glancing at her son. Jaden sat at their scratched but clean kitchen table, absently pushing his spoon through his breakfast. The morning sun filtered through the faded yellow curtains, casting warm patterns across the worn linoleum floor. "Baby, you've been stirring that oatmeal for 5 minutes straight," Trina said, wiping her hands on her waitress uniform. "Is everything okay?" Jaden looked up, seeming to come back from wherever his thoughts had taken him. "Just thinking about the test today," he said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Trina noticed the slight hesitation in his voice, the same tell he'd had since he was little, when he wasn't telling the whole truth. She'd also noticed how he'd changed clothes before coming home from his paper route yesterday, though he'd tried to hide the scraped elbow. But with 3 job interviews lined up today and her double shift at the diner looming, she didn't have time to dig deeper. "You've been studying for weeks," she assured him, dropping a kiss on top of his head. "Don't forget Aunt Rachel's picking you up after school today. I won't be home until late." A deep rumble outside their window interrupted their conversation. Both Trina and Jaden turned to look as a sleek black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up in front of their building. In their neighborhood, a vehicle like that usually meant one of 2 things. Either someone was in trouble with the law, or the landlord was coming to collect overdue rent. Trina's hand instinctively went to her cross necklace. "Jaden, go to your room," she said quietly. "Mom, it's okay," Jaden started to say, but before he could explain, 2 figures emerged from the SUV. The first was a tall man in an impeccable charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the morning light. Behind him was a younger man carrying a leather portfolio, looking somewhat uncomfortable as he surveyed the neighborhood. "Oh Lord," Trina muttered, recognizing the older man's face from magazine covers. "Jaden Williams, what did you do?" "Nothing bad, I promise," Jaden said quickly. "That's just the man from yesterday, the one I told you about from my paper route. He probably just wants to say thank you again." A firm knock at their door made them both jump. Trina smoothed her uniform and straightened her shoulders, years of dealing with difficult customers kicking in. She opened the door to find Elliot Richardson, one of the wealthiest men in the city, standing on her worn welcome mat. "Mrs. Williams?" Elliot's voice was warm but formal. "I'm Elliot Richardson, and this is my assistant, James Cooper. Your son Jaden saved my life yesterday morning." Trina's posture relaxed slightly, but her guard remained up. "Yes, he mentioned helping someone on his route. Please come in." She stepped aside, gesturing to their small living room. Elliot's eyes swept the room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the carefully patched curtains, the wall of family photos showing happier times. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but the signs of financial struggle were clear to someone who knew what to look for. "Mrs. Williams," Elliot began, remaining standing despite the offered seat. "I'm here because your son did something extraordinary yesterday. I was distracted, careless, and nearly walked into oncoming traffic. If Jaden hadn't acted as quickly and bravely as he did, I wouldn't be standing here today." Trina's eyes widened as she turned to her son. "Jaden, you didn't tell me it was that serious." "I didn't want you to worry," Jaden mumbled, studying his shoes. "It wasn't really that big a deal." "Not a big deal?" Elliot's voice rose slightly. "Young man, you risked your own life to save mine." James stepped forward, opening his portfolio. "Mrs. Williams, Mr. Richardson would like to offer compensation for your son's heroic act. We've prepared a check that we believe." "No." Jaden's voice was firm, surprising everyone in the room. "I told you yesterday, sir. I don't want money for helping someone. That's not why I did it." "Jaden," Trina began, but her son cut her off. "Mom, you always tell me that doing the right thing is its own reward. That's what Dad believed too, right? He didn't get paid extra for volunteering at the fire department." Tears welled in Trina's eyes as she pulled Jaden into a tight hug. "You're so much like him," she whispered. Elliot watched the exchange with an odd expression on his face. He gestured for James to put away the checkbook. His eyes drifted to the family photos on the wall, lingering on one showing a younger Trina with a handsome man in a firefighter's uniform, both beaming as they held a toddler-aged Jaden. "Your husband?" he asked softly. Trina's hand went to her cross necklace again. "Marcus. He died 3 years ago, saving a family from a house fire. Then you understand better than most, Elliot said, his voice gentle. Some debts can never be repaid with money, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to honor them in other ways. He noticed the engineering textbooks on Jaden's desk. I understand you're interested in engineering, Jaden? Jaden's face lit up despite his attempt to remain casual. Yes, sir. I'm working on a bridge design for the state competition next month. A bridge designer. Elliot smiled, his first genuine smile of the morning. You know, my company has a scholarship program for promising young engineers. Perhaps. Mr. Richardson, Trina interrupted firmly. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Jaden needs to earn his way on his own merits, not because he happened to be in the right place at the right time. Elliot studied her for a moment, noting the same quiet dignity he'd seen in her son. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to Jaden. The thick cream-colored cardstock felt expensive between Jaden's fingers. If you ever need anything at all, call me, Elliot said seriously. Day or night. That's my personal number on the back. As he prepared to leave, Elliot paused in the doorway, looking back at Jaden. You know, my daughter wanted to be an engineer too. She would have liked you. Something in his voice made both Trina and Jaden look up sharply, but Elliot was already turning away. They watched from their window as the black SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb. Well, Trina said after a long moment. That was unexpected. She checked her watch and sighed. I'm gonna be late. We'll talk about this more tonight, okay? And about not telling me the whole story yesterday. Yes, ma'am, Jaden nodded. Mom? You seemed really nice. Not stuck up at all, like rich people on TV. Trina gathered her purse and keys, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes people surprise you. But Jaden, she fixed him with a serious look. Be careful with that card. People don't usually offer help without expecting something in return. He seemed sincere, Jaden protested. And he mentioned his daughter. I wonder what happened to her. That's not our business, Trina said firmly, but her voice softened. Though it might explain why he came all this way just to say thank you. Loss changes people, baby. Sometimes it makes them harder, sometimes softer. She hugged him tightly before heading for the door. I'm proud of you for helping him, but please be more careful. I can't lose you too. After she left, Jaden pulled out the business card again, running his fingers over the raised letters. The phone number on the back was handwritten in precise, elegant script. He carefully placed the card in his desk drawer, between the pages of his favorite engineering book. As he gathered his school books, his eyes fell on the family photo Mr. Richardson had noticed. His father in his dress uniform, smiling proudly at the camera. Did I do the right thing, Dad? He whispered to the image, turning down his help. The photo didn't answer, of course, but Jaden could almost hear his father's voice. Sometimes the right thing isn't about what you get or give, son. Sometimes it's about who you become in the process. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows behind him as he walked to school. While across town, Elliot Richardson sat in his luxury car, staring at a photo of his own daughter and making plans that would change all their lives forever. Rain drummed against the study windows as Elliot Richardson stood in contemplative silence, the morning's meeting with Jaden and his mother playing on repeat in his mind. The modest apartment, Trina's careful dignity, the engineering books scattered across Jaden's desk. But most of all, that family photo of the fallen firefighter who, like his son, had given everything to save others. James, he called out. His assistant appeared immediately, tablet in hand. I need everything you can find on the Williams family. School records, employment history, financial situation, all of it. James raised an eyebrow. Sir, are you sure that's appropriate? Probably not, Elliot admitted, settling into his leather chair. But that boy saved my life, and his mother's pride won't let me help them directly. We'll have to find another way. I'll have preliminary information within the hour. James nodded, already typing. Any particular focus? Jaden's academics, especially math and science, and his mother's employment situation. Elliot turned to face the wall of family photos behind his desk, his eyes finding Emma's graduation picture. And James? Be very discreet. While waiting, Elliot lost himself in memories of his daughter. She'd had that same spark he'd seen in Jaden, that drive to make the world better. How many science fairs had he missed? How many next times had he promised before there were no more next times? James returned sooner than expected, his tablet loaded with information. The story of the Williams family unfolded through public records and newspaper clippings. Marcus Williams, decorated firefighter, had died saving a family of 4. Insurance money had helped initially, but medical bills from his final hospital stay had devoured most of it. Trina Williams works 3 jobs, James reported. Mornings at the diner, evenings at the grocery store, and weekends at a clinic. She's been applying for better positions, but without a college degree. And Jaden, straight A student, exceptional in STEM subjects. Multiple math competition wins. His current bridge design project is generating significant attention in academic circles. His teachers consistently note his problem-solving abilities and work ethic. What's their financial situation? James hesitated. Challenging. Rent is 3 weeks overdue. Outstanding medical bills from Mr. Williams's final stay. The paper route helps, but between basic expenses and college savings, it's impossible, Elliot finished, jaw tightening. That boy saved my life without hesitation, and he can't even afford to chase his dreams. We could offer direct financial assistance, James suggested. A trust fund for education. No, Elliot shook his head. You saw how they responded this morning. We need to be more subtle. He stood and began pacing. What local organizations handle scholarship programs? The Metropolitan Education Foundation is prominent. They have a STEM scholarship that would be perfect for Jaden, but the deadline passed last month. Who runs it? Elizabeth Whitmore. Elliot smiled slightly. She owes me a favor. Call her. We need to discuss expanding their program. Immediately. Over the next few hours, Elliot's study became a command center of quiet but intense activity. By evening, the Metropolitan Education Foundation had received an anonymous donation specifically for engineering students from underprivileged backgrounds. The criteria mysteriously matched Jaden's situation perfectly, and the deadline was extended. The scholarship will cover everything, James confirmed. Tuition, room and board, books, supplies, at any engineering school in the country. Information packets will go to all local schools tomorrow. Good, Elliot nodded. Now about Trina. What positions do we have open? Executive assistant position in the engineering division. Good salary, full benefits, regular hours. Perfect. Have HR posted tomorrow. Emphasize experience in customer service rather than formal education. Make sure Trina sees it. Already arranged through her coworker Jenny at the diner. James smiled. You've been busy. I learned from the best, sir. James handed over a folder containing copies of the Williams overdue bills. There's one more thing. I took the liberty of looking into their outstanding debts. Elliot reviewed the total, significant to the Williams, but trivial to his accounts. Handle it through the charitable foundation. Make it look like a program for families of fallen first responders. Already drafted. They'll receive notification by week's end. Elliot settled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. You know, James, this is the first time since Emma that I've felt like I'm doing something truly meaningful. James set down his tablet. If I may speak freely, after Mrs. Richardson and Emma, you changed. Withdrew. Today is the first time I've seen you truly invested in something beyond business metrics. I couldn't save her, Elliot said quietly, looking at Emma's photo. All my money, all my influence, and I couldn't save my daughter. But maybe I can help save someone else's dreams. Emma would be proud, sir. Would she? I was never there for her achievements. Always too busy with the next deal. And now here's this boy with the same passion she had. And his mother works 3 jobs just to survive. He touched the letter he still carried in his jacket pocket. Emma's last words about her plans to use engineering to help others. Dreams ended too soon by a tragic flight. Sir? James interrupted gently. Everything's in motion. Scholarship announcement tomorrow. Job posting in the morning. Bill payments by Friday. Anything else? No, James. Excellent work today. Go home to your family. After James left, Elliot remained by the window, watching the rain. The emptiness since losing Emma didn't feel quite so overwhelming. He looked at the photo he'd secretly taken that morning of Jaden's engineering sketches. The boy had real talent. With the right opportunities, he could change the world, just as Emma had wanted to. Maybe this is why I survived, he whispered to Emma's photo. Maybe this is what you've been trying to tell me. That it's not enough to just exist. We have to make it matter. As night fell, 2 worlds continued turning. In their apartment, Jaden worked on his bridge design while Trina counted bills, unaware of the changes in motion. And in his mansion, Elliot Richardson felt truly peaceful for the first time in years, knowing that tomorrow would bring new hope to a family that had already given him something priceless, a reason to care again. Time to pay it forward, he whispered before turning off his study lights. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to help without being seen, to make a difference without taking credit. And for the first time in 5 years, Elliot Richardson was looking forward to tomorrow. The evening shift at Morton's grocery had run late, and Trina's feet ached as she walked home under the flickering streetlights. She'd missed the last bus, but the walk would save a few dollars, and every penny counted. Her mind was on Jaden and the strange series of fortunate events that had occurred lately. The mysterious scholarship announcement, the promising job listing Jenny had shown her, the unexpected letter about assistance for first responders' families. "Lord, if this is your way of answering prayers," she whispered, touching her cross necklace, "I'm listening." The intersection ahead was quiet, typical for this time of night. Trina waited for the walk signal, just as she'd always taught Jaden to do. The light changed, and she stepped into the crosswalk. She never saw the pickup truck that ran the red light, never heard the screech of tires or the horrified screams of the few witnesses. The last thing she remembered was a flash of headlights and thinking, Jaden's going to be waiting up, then darkness. Across town, Jaden sat at his desk, trying to focus on his homework, but really watching the clock. Mom should have been home by now. He tried calling, but her phone went straight to voicemail, probably dead again. He was debating whether to call Aunt Rachel when the house phone rang. "Hello, is this Jaden Williams?" An unfamiliar voice, professional but gentle. "Yes, this is Nurse Martinez from Metro General Hospital. There's been an accident involving your mother, Trina Williams. She's been brought to our emergency department." The rest of the words blurred together as Jaden's world tilted sideways. He vaguely heard himself asking which hospital entrance to use, what floor to go to. His hands moved automatically, grabbing his jacket, his mother's insurance card from the kitchen drawer. "I should have picked her up," he muttered as he ran down the stairs. "Should have walked her home. Should have." Aunt Rachel appeared seemingly out of nowhere, her car already running. She must have gotten a call too. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and silent prayers. Meanwhile, in his home office, Elliot Richardson was reviewing the final details of the scholarship program when James burst in without knocking, something he'd never done in 15 years of service. "Sir, there's been an accident. Trina Williams was hit by a drunk driver 20 minutes ago. She's at Metro General, condition critical." Elliot was on his feet before James finished speaking. "Get the car, and call Dr. Stacy Chen. Tell her I'm calling in that favor she owes me." "Already done, sir. She's heading to Metro General now. And I've contacted the hospital's administrative office. They're expecting you." The drive to the hospital was tense, with Elliot making calls to every medical contact in his considerable network. By the time they arrived, 3 of the city's top trauma specialists were already en route. They found Jaden in the emergency waiting room, looking small and lost in an oversized chair while his aunt spoke with a doctor. Elliot's heart clenched at the sight. He'd worn that same shell-shocked expression when the police had come to tell him about Emma's plane. "Jaden," he said softly, approaching the boy. Jaden looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mr. Richardson? How did you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here, and we're going to help your mother. The best doctors in the city are on their way," the doctor said. Jaden's voice cracked. "They said she's really hurt. Internal bleeding and he couldn't continue." Elliot sat beside him, careful to give him space but close enough to offer support. "Listen to me, Jaden. Your mother is strong. She's a fighter, and she has something worth fighting for. You. But what if?" Jaden's hands twisted in his lap. "What if she, like Dad? It's my fault. I should have been there. I should have protected her like I protected you." "No," Elliot said firmly. "This is not your fault. The only person at fault is the drunk driver who hit her." A doctor approached, Dr. Chun, looking focused but concerned. "Mr. Richardson, can we speak privately?" "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of her son," Elliot replied. Dr. Chun nodded. "Mrs. Williams's condition is critical but stable for now. The next 24 hours will be crucial. There's significant internal bleeding, and we need to operate immediately." Whatever she needs, Elliot said. Cost is not an issue. I've assembled the best trauma team available, Dr. Chen assured him. We're prepping for surgery now. But there's something else. Mrs. Williams regained consciousness briefly. She's asking for Jaden. They followed Dr. Chen to a trauma bay, where Trina lay surrounded by medical equipment. Despite the tubes and monitors, she managed a weak smile when she saw her son. Baby, she whispered as Jaden rushed to her side. My brave boy. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have. Shoo. Trina's hand found his, squeezing weakly. Not your fault. You listened to me, Jaden Marcus Williams. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I am so proud of you. Her eyes shifted to Elliot, who stood respectfully back. Mr. Richardson, I'm here, Mrs. Williams. If anything happens... She took a shaky breath. Promise me you'll look after my boy. He's so bright, has so much potential. Mom, don't talk like that. Jaden protested. Promise me, Trina insisted, her eyes locked on Elliot's. Elliot stepped forward, taking her other hand. I promise, Mrs. Williams. But you're going to be fine. You're going to see Jaden graduate. See him become an engineer. See all his dreams come true. A ghost of a smile touched Trina's lips. You're a good man, Mr. Richardson. Better than you think you are. Her eyes fluttered. So tired. Mrs. Williams? Dr. Chen stepped forward. We need to take you to surgery now. Mom? Jaden's voice cracked. Mom, please. Love you, baby. Trina whispered. Love you more than all the stars in the sky. Jaden finished their ritual phrase as they wheeled her away, his voice breaking on the last word. As soon as she was gone, Jaden's composure crumbled. His knees buckled, and Elliot caught him before he could fall, holding him as great. Heaving sobs racked his young frame. I can't lose her too, Jaden cried into Elliot's expensive suit jacket. She's all I have left. Please, God, please don't take her too. You won't lose her, Elliot promised, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. And even if the worst happens, which it won't, you'll never be alone. I promised your mother, and I promise you, whatever happens, I'm here. Over the next several hours, Elliot's influence transformed the hospital's waiting room into a command center. James coordinated with doctors, handled paperwork, and ensured everyone involved knew that Mrs. Williams was to receive VIP treatment. Aunt Rachel provided a steady stream of coffee and quiet prayers. And Elliot never left Jaden's side. My daughter Emma, Elliot said softly as they waited. She wanted to be an engineer too. Was always building things, solving problems. She would have loved your bridge design. Jaden looked up from where he'd been staring at his hands. What happened to her? Plane crash. 5 years ago. She was flying to her college graduation when... Elliot swallowed hard. I was supposed to be on that flight too, but I had an important meeting. Rescheduled at the last minute. I'm sorry, Jaden whispered. I've spent 5 years drowning in guilt, wondering why I survived when she didn't. But maybe I survived so I could be here now. So I could help when it matters most. Dr. Chen appeared again, looking tired but cautiously optimistic. The surgery went well. We've stopped the bleeding and stabilized her vital organs. The next few hours are critical, but she's fighting hard. Can I see her? Jaden asked. She's in recovery now. One visitor at a time, just for a few minutes. In the recovery room, Trina lay still and pale among the machines, keeping her alive. Jaden approached slowly, taking her hand as gently as if it were made of glass. Mom? His voice was barely a whisper. Mom, I'm here. I need you to wake up. Okay. I need you to come back to me. Remember how you always say we're a team? Well, I can't do this without my teammate. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he continued. Mr. Richardson got you the best doctors in the city. They fixed everything inside that was bleeding. Now you just need to wake up. Please, Mom. Please wake up. From the doorway, Elliot watched the scene with a heavy heart, remembering similar moments by Emma's hospital bed. But this time would be different. This time, he had the power to help, and he would move heaven and earth to ensure this boy didn't lose his mother the way he had lost his daughter. Sir? James appeared at his elbow. The police caught the driver. He's being charged with DUI and reckless endangerment. And I've arranged for Mrs. Williams to be transferred to a private room in the VIP wing once she's stable enough to move. Good, Elliot nodded. Make sure Jaden has full access, whatever the visiting hours are supposed to be. And find out if he needs anything from home, clothes, schoolwork, anything. Already sent a car to their apartment. His aunt is collecting some essentials. Elliot watched as Jaden pressed his forehead to his mother's hand, his lips moving in silent prayer. In that moment, he looked so young, so vulnerable, and yet so strong, just like he had been the morning he saved Elliot's life. You know, James, Elliot said quietly, when he pulled me back from that car, I thought the universe was giving me a second chance. But maybe it was giving me something more, a purpose, a way to make Emma proud. I think, James replied softly. She already is. Through the long night, they maintained their vigil. Doctors came and went, checking vital signs, adjusting medications. Jaden refused to leave his mother's side, and Elliot refused to leave his. As dawn began to paint the hospital windows with pale light, they waited together, a boy who had saved a stranger's life, and a man determined to save his. 3 weeks after the accident, sunlight streamed through the windows of Trina's private hospital room as she took her first unassisted steps since the surgery. Jaden hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she stumbled, while the physical therapist offered quiet encouragement. I'm not made of glass, baby. Trina smiled at her son's worried expression. The doctors say I'm healing well. Just be careful, Mom, Jaden insisted, his hand never far from her elbow. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of countless nights split between hospital visits and studying, determined not to let his grades slip despite everything. 5 more steps, Mrs. Williams, the therapist encouraged. You're doing great. As Trina completed her session, she noticed a fresh bouquet of lilies on her bedside table. Her favorite flowers, though she couldn't remember telling anyone that. They appeared every few days, along with the best care money could buy, though she'd never seen a bill. Later that afternoon, as Jaden worked on homework in the corner, Trina received an unexpected visitor. James Cooper, Elliot's assistant, arrived with a folder full of paperwork. Mrs. Williams, he smiled warmly. How are you feeling today? Better, thank you. She gestured to the flowers. These wouldn't be Mr. Richardson's doing, would they? James's slight smile told her everything. Actually, there's something you should know about your care here. He proceeded to explain everything. The specialist surgeons Elliot had called in, the private room, the rehabilitation program. Trina's eyes filled with tears. But why? He barely knows us. I believe, James said gently, that your son reminded him of what it means to make a difference in someone's life. He's been different since meeting Jaden, more like his old self. When Elliot visited that evening, Trina was waiting for him. The lilies, she said softly. They were my wedding flowers. Elliot paused in the doorway. Your sister mentioned it. Said they always make you smile. Mr. Richardson, Trina's voice caught. I can never repay. You already have, he interrupted. Your son saved my life, Mrs. Williams. But more than that, he saved my soul. Let me do this, please. Over the next few months, as Trina grew stronger, a new routine developed. Elliot began visiting several times a week, often bringing engineering books or projects to discuss with Jaden. Their conversations would last hours, ranging from practical design principles to philosophical discussions about responsibility and innovation. See here, Elliot would say, pointing to Jaden's bridge designs. If you adjust the load distribution like this, he'd pull out his own pencil, sketching modifications while Jaden watched intently. One evening, Jaden looked up from their work to find his mother watching them with tears in her eyes. Mom, are you okay? Just happy, baby, she smiled. You remind me so much of your father when you get excited about your projects. Jaden's academic performance soared under Elliot's mentorship. His bridge design won not only the state competition, but national recognition, catching the attention of several prestigious universities. MIT's engineering program wants to interview you, Elliot announced one day, trying to hide his proud smile. MIT? Jaden's eyes widened. But even with the scholarship, which you earned entirely on merit, Elliot reminded him firmly. Your design innovations impressed every judge. You did this, Jaden. No one else. The change in Elliot was noticeable to everyone who knew him. He began taking a more active role in his foundation's charitable work, establishing programs specifically designed to help families of first responders and promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. "You've started quite a trend, sir," James commented one day, reviewing the foundation's latest initiatives. The Richardson Williams First Responder Family Support Program has already helped 50 families this year. Elliot smiled at the program's name, his quiet tribute to Jaden's father. "It's time my money did more than just sit in bank accounts, James. Emma would have wanted this." Meanwhile, Trina's recovery progressed steadily. As her strength returned, she interviewed for the executive assistant position at Richardson Global Enterprises. Her years of customer service experience and natural organizational skills made her an ideal candidate. "The engineering division needs someone who can keep multiple projects on track," her interviewer explained, not mentioning that Elliot had recused himself entirely from the hiring process. "Your background in managing multiple responsibilities is exactly what we're looking for." The day Trina started her new job, with its regular hours and comprehensive benefits, she finally felt like she could breathe again. For the first time since losing Marcus, the future looked bright rather than daunting. Time passed quickly, marked by achievements and small victories. Jaden's college acceptance letters piled up. Trina excelled at her new position. Elliot found himself spending more holidays with the Williams family than alone in his mansion. Finally, on a bright June morning, hundreds of people gathered in the high school auditorium to watch the graduation ceremony. Jaden stood at the podium, his valedictorian medals glinting in the light. "For years ago," he began, his voice clear and confident, "I learned something important about heroes. They're not just the ones who run into burning buildings or pull people from danger. Sometimes they're the ones who believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, who show up day after day, making sacrifices no one sees." His eyes found his mother in the crowd, sitting beside Elliot in the front row. "My father was my first hero. He taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. My mother is my hero too. She showed me that true strength isn't about never falling, but about getting back up every time life knocks you down." Trina wiped tears from her eyes as Jaden continued. "And sometimes heroes appear when you least expect them. Sometimes saving someone's life is just the beginning of the story." Elliot felt his own eyes growing moist as Jaden spoke about mentorship, opportunity, and the responsibility to pay forward the kindness you receive. In the young man at the podium, he could see echoes of Emma's passion, Marcus's courage, and Trina's determination. "We all have the power to be heroes," Jaden concluded, "not through grand gestures, but through small acts of kindness that ripple outward in ways we may never see." So, as we graduate today, I challenge each of you to find your way to make a difference, to be someone's hero, even if they never know your name. The applause was thunderous. As Jaden descended from the podium, both Trina and Elliot stood to embrace him. "Your father would be so proud," Trina whispered, touching her cross necklace. "As proud as I am," Elliot added, his voice rough with emotion. Later, as they walked together across the sunny campus, Trina's limp barely noticeable now, Elliot looked at the small family he'd somehow acquired. The empty mansion that had once echoed with his grief now regularly rang with Jaden's laughter and Trina's gentle wisdom. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Emma used to say that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters most." She was a wise young woman. Trina smiled, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for showing up for us." "Thank you for letting me," Elliot replied. Jaden looked at them both, his mother, stronger than ever, and the man who had become like a second father to him. "So, what happens now?" "Now?" Elliot grinned. "Now you go to MIT and revolutionize engineering. Your mother continues to keep my company running smoothly. And he paused thoughtfully, "I keep looking for more heroes to help. Thanks to you both." As they walked to the car together, their shadows merged in the late afternoon sun. From above, perhaps Marcus and Emma were watching. A firefighter's sacrifice and a daughter's dreams living on through the unexpected bonds formed between a wealthy man who had lost his way and a family who had shown him the way back. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. They had learned that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism aren't about saving lives in a single dramatic moment, but about choosing to be there, day after day, helping others find their way through the darkness into the light. Together, they were ready to write the next chapter of their story. If this story of Jaden and Elliot touched your heart, please consider subscribing to my channel for more powerful tales of humanity, courage, and redemption. Every like, comment, and share helps spread these messages of hope and reminds us that even in our darkest moments, light can come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for being part of this journey, and remember, sometimes the smallest actions can create the biggest ripples in the lives of others. See you in the next story.